Welcome to Story Power TV. I am your host, Loren Norris, and it is my honor to be here in studio, and I really appreciate you guys being a part of the show. If you'll take some time, just smash that subscribe button, share it with some friends. Today we're going to talk about leadership from a unique perspective. Not only a position of faith, but one of the things about leadership is that idea of working your way from the bottom up. To actually start at the beginning and not just do what's necessary to jump through the hoops, but to earn the right to lead. And today we have in studio someone that I met through mutual broadcaster, a guy by the name of Michael Chavez, also on OBBM TV. And he had a brief conversation with this guy at a network meeting and said, wow, you guys really should talk because you kind of got the same heart for leadership. And then when I talked to my guest, it was on the phone driving through Arkansas, and there was just another kindred spirit connection there. And I said, yeah, that's somebody we want to have on the show to bring more wisdom, more knowledge, more information, not only about leadership, but also about story power. So please help me welcome to the studio my guest, Rich Ashton. Rich, I appreciate you being here, sir.
I love being here. Thanks so much for the invite.
Absolutely. Well, when we talked on the phone, I felt like I was not talking to myself, but talking to one of my mentors, like, someone that I've spent a lot of time under, and we've known each other the length of that phone call. So I really appreciate you making the drive down here. I know Granbury is quite a hike from anywhere, unless you live in Granbury, but I appreciate you coming out.
Well, like I said, it's my pleasure. Now, I think you're only referring to me as a mentor just because I'm so old.
No, it wouldn't be with age. It's that list of accomplishments, and I shared the bio that you sent in the live stream so that people can see that it's quite a resume. We were talking before we went live about Trammell Crow and your experience there, but for a lot of people, just being in the real estate industry from the 70s to the 90s it was an evolution of time, of culture, of society. I remember people talking about the societal change when we simply moved garage doors from the front of the house to the back of the house and what that meant. But commercial properties and the design of them and the way that people move them or generate revenue from them has evolved. But that was a lifetime ago. I mean, you've run business since then, written books since then, changed the world since then. So I look at your accomplishments and think, well, I need to get out of bed earlier because I haven't done anything yet.
Well, it took a lot of years to do that stuff. So I don't know if I've accomplished that much, but I've had a ball all along the way.
So you took the time to write a book.
I did.
Growing Your Own.
Correct. And
the first question I ask anybody who writes a book is why?
It's a great question, and it's kind of a fun question for me because I did not intend to write the book. After being frustrated in small business, like most small business owners, that there's not another layer of leadership. It's just you and 5 people, and the other 4 have not been trained in leadership. So when it's time to move forward, when growth says, hey, you're having enough success, we need to bring somebody in or we need to promote somebody, you're left with the idea of bringing somebody in. If you bring somebody in from outside and they have been trained in leadership, they haven't been trained in small business.
Right.
And because most leadership training occurs in larger businesses. And the transition from a big business to a small business is not pleasant most of the time. Small businesses are chaotic, run by the seat of their pants. And the thing that is fun for the entrepreneur and the owner of the business is that he or she gets to do a lot of different things every day. That's not how most people are wired. And so if you bring someone who is trained to do 1, 2, 3 things, do them repetitively and do them well, into a business which requires them to do a lot of different things, some of which they're not very good at, that's not a fun experience for them. On the other hand, the employees who have given you their all, who have worked those crazy hours, have been so bought into the mission of your small business, they wonder why you brought in somebody from outside when it was time for a promotion. But if you promote those people without any training, if you promote them into a leadership role, 9 times out of 10 they're going to fail. And so I decided, having faced that dilemma several times, I had brought people in, I had also promoted from within to people who were not ready to be promoted, had failed the majority of the time. And I said, if I'm ever going to retire, I have to be strategic about this, and I have to train the group of leaders, hopefully from within the company, because these people get what we're doing. They get the uniqueness of our business. They get our mission. If I can train them to be leaders, or some of them to be leaders, those are the people I want to promote to take my place when I leave the company. That was done over a period of 8 years. The first training exercise that I did was a mistake. I trained the people, or tried to train the people, to think like me, an entrepreneurial owner. Dead wrong. I didn't need entrepreneurs, I needed leaders. So I sat back and I thought, I better retool this thing, and I did that. And so I started with the idea that all of us have limits on our abilities, whether it's in leadership
Right.
or something else, and most of the time they're self-imposed limits, or they're limits that have been imposed by the world. And we've been taught what we can't do. Maybe we're emotional, maybe we're fearful, whatever it is. And I started with 8 people in the organization, and we went around the room and identified what limitations it was that were holding them back from becoming leaders. And then we began to attack the specific limitations on each one of them. We went forward and we were making good progress. I was happy with the results, but there was some magic missing. And I don't know why it occurred to me to do this, but I thought maybe if I write a blog every 2 weeks to the leadership team, I will get them talking about these management principles and these leadership principles. And I enjoy writing. I've done a lot of writing, and so that was kind of natural for me to do that. I wrote the blogs, and they were in no particular order. They were kind of random about whatever it is we were going through at the time, and it still didn't work. And the general manager said, you know, I think if we made them read these together in leadership meetings, I think we might start to gain some traction. He was dead right. That unlocked
Right.
the magic. And as they read these together, they began holding each other accountable to the principles that I had outlined in the blogs. And that's when the leadership course really took off. Well, if you fast forward 2 years, I was about out of ammunition, frankly. I was starting to repeat myself in the blogs. I read through them one weekend, and I said, this is pretty good stuff, and I'm getting close to retiring. I'm going to publish these as a book. And so I reorganized them. I moved them. I had 52 blogs written. I reduced the number to 35 separate principles, 2.5 pages per chapter, and I published them as a book, which is called Growing Your Own, as in Growing Your Own Leaders. I really did it as a legacy project. I really thought that this is something that as I retired, I would leave with family and friends and the employees. And it's kind of written as a desktop guide, so they would continue to use the book in their growth as leaders. Then my entrepreneurial spirit took over, and I said, I think this is something that should be shared with small business owners and wannabe leaders everywhere, because the problem exists in almost every small business in America.
You know, there are a couple of things that you said that sparked some previous study that I've done. I remember someone saying, we need to train all of our leaders to rise up a little bit. And the reply was, well, what if we train them all and they leave and become our competition? And the answer was, well, what if we don't train them and they stay? And
that's a great point.
It's a direct reflection of what you're talking about. I also recall, you know, John Maxwell says a lot about leadership development and a lot about leading a team. And he said, you know, that the person who is the greatest leader is the one who can find the greatest leaders and raise them up. The challenge that we have from Sir Lawrence and the education, the foundation of public education, through the Rockefellers and the Fords and others over the last 2 centuries, the tendency of a big company is to say, I have a gap. It's a narrow gap. It's a skill gap. Maybe it's a personality or management or leadership gap. But I'm going to train someone to fill that gap. And so the maximum capacity that you draw out of someone or instill in them when you're looking for that gap to be filled is, I'm going to shave the cork and shape the cork for that hole and nothing else. Mm-hmm. Then the challenge you run into is exactly what you said. Do we hire from the outside to fill that hole, or do we train from the inside to fill that hole? And the answer really is you can't do either one, because if the only capacity that you want them for is that hole, then you end up with an assembly line production group that all of them together can finish the thing, but none of them alone could do it. There's a lot to be said about teamwork value there, but there's also a lot to be said about incompetency outside of your own zone.
Well, I'm a big believer in people empowerment, employee empowerment. And so you mentioned earlier, what if we train our competition? I've trained lots of our competition.
Yeah.
And it's a source of pride. They're people. If my goal is to train them for something, that's probably the wrong goal. If my goal is to empower them to become something they never dreamed about being, whether they do it for us or for someone else is not the question.
Yeah.
Can we raise people up to do things they never thought they could do? That's the challenge, and that's the fun of leadership to me.
And I think that's what leadership really should be about, right? I remember John Maxwell, I think it was in the 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth. He said, you've got to learn to move the spotlight. And the challenge for so many, especially younger leaders, is I want to find the place to get into the spotlight. I want to grow my influence. I want to grow awareness about me. Now, there's a tension with that, because even today, John Maxwell says, you've got to figure out how to get out of the people pile, which means you've got to figure out how to not be counted among the masses, but to stand up enough to say, I'm willing to be a leader, whatever that takes. I'm willing to be the first one shot at, the first one yelled at, the first one critiqued, the first one cast down. I'm willing to do that, but I've got to stand out to do that. And some people say, well, that's got to be your resume. It's got to be your marketing. You've got to be running your own PR campaign constantly. And at some point, it becomes the, how do I get in the spotlight ambition. Then the idea of moving that spotlight going, actually, they're better at this than I am. And now all of a sudden the ego is bruised. The pursuit of the spotlight is in danger. And moving the spotlight to somebody else and go, Rich is way better at this than I am. Let Rich do the job, becomes not only a fantasy, but a threat.
Yeah, maybe I'm wired differently. That was not a problem for me. When I bought HVAC companies, I don't know anything about HVAC. I couldn't repair my own air conditioner if my life depended on it. I couldn't install an air conditioner. So I was a pretty good delegator from the get-go. And I was taught that early in life. So it's always been okay for me for other people to have skills that I don't have. I have skills that they don't have, and that's good enough. My ultimate skill as a leader is developing people. It's not doing everything. I don't want to do everything. And
right.
And the organization will never move forward like it should if I have to do everything, or any other business leader. If you're stuck running a business and it's all up to you, and if you walk out the door, the business doesn't succeed, you've not been a leader, you've just been in business.
Well, or worse than that, Brandon Dawson says if you have the kind of job that if you miss a day, a week, a month due to illness or vacation, and the business doesn't move forward, you haven't built a business, you've built a job. Mm-hmm. You may have yourself as a boss, but you still have a job because there's no work done when you're not there to do it. And that was really convicting for me, because I've been self-employed since 2009. And when I hear words like that, I realize I'm not an entrepreneur. I am still currently self-employed, and my boss is a jerk. I work for probably the meanest guy in town who doesn't get anything done on his own. So the idea of growing a business by growing the people obviously is a strategy. Even on our phone call, we talked about a friend of mine, a guy by the name of Brian Mad Dog Maddox, who was captain in I believe it was in the Air Force, flew the F-15, flew the U-2 aircraft, the SR-71. I believe all that's right. I know the 15 for sure, and one of those two high altitude planes. But he came out of the military and went to work in mid-level management, and he was lamenting the day that he walked in and said, we need a new stapler and these pieces of equipment, and the total bill was like $150. And they're like, yeah, you have to submit that for approval. And he's like, at some point you got to realize this guy has flown a $40 million or $400 million aircraft and made life and death decisions in 13 seconds or less with millions of dollars and other lives at stake. $150 shouldn't be a hard decision for him. And yet the structure that we built, the silos that we built, the levels of authority and approval within an organization, that sometimes they seem like they were created because someone wants to be able to go, I have the power. I get to decide whether or not you buy a $20 stapler. And since it's my decision, I'm in charge and you're under me. And it's just a power trip or an ego trip. It's not really good management.
You know, as silly as that example sounds, it's repeated daily. I think that comes from people being immersed in their business and not being able to, not having the time or the desire to take a 30,000-foot look at what's going on in the business. Because any reasonable person from 30,000 feet would look down on that example and go, that's silly. We can't be doing that. We can't be arguing over $150 decisions if we're going to go anywhere. But most small business owners are so busy surviving and trying to squeeze as much profit as they can that they don't have time to really develop the business.
Right.
And until you're able to offload some responsibilities and some real decision-making authority with your people, hopefully with your new leaders, until you can do that, you're never going to have time to take 30 minutes, take an hour, take a half a day on a weekend and take a look at your business and go, what makes sense and what doesn't? And sometimes that's a pretty sobering look. I've been there.
Have you studied the 6 Types of Working Genius?
No.
Patrick Lencioni?
I've read some of his stuff. I haven't read that.
I recommend that one. I was a big fan of StrengthsFinders. Of course, being in the Maxwell group, I've studied the DISC and the Florence Littauer and the colors and the animals, and the list goes on and on and on. When I found StrengthsFinders about 15, 18 years ago, one of the things I loved about StrengthsFinders was the level of magnitude that the Gallup group has gone into to say, is that just the nature of humans, or is it just the nature of that human? And a lot of those answers are like 1 in 330 million people. And when you start to break those down, you're like, there's a whole lot of people named Karen. I'm only married to one of them. And that one has some very unique personality traits, character traits, expectations in life, performance goals, et cetera, et cetera. And when I know what those are, I treat her differently than I would anybody else with the same name. I think there are a lot of employers who don't get to know their employees, like you said, their strengths, their capabilities, their competencies. Can I trust this one to do that work? When I contrasted that with the 6 Types of Working Genius, what I found was it's one thing to know what someone's personality is, what makes them happy, what makes them sad, what makes them laugh, what makes them giggle, what's going to just trigger them into a puddle of emotions that gets nothing done. But when I studied the genius, what I found was there are things that we do in work that we may be competent at, but we really don't like it. I'm really good at math, and I absolutely hate it. I have zero passion for math. There are things that I do in podcasting even that require some understanding of basic math and electronics and things of that nature. I don't do it because I love it. I do it because it's a necessity. But if I could avoid math, I would. I know people, on the other hand, they're like, give me a calculator and a spreadsheet full of numbers, and I will forget that there are other humans around. I'm so stoked to do that and look at the data and study the spreadsheets. When I listen to your idea of, do we bring them in from the outside, or do we raise them up from the inside? How do you decide which ones you raise up and which ones you bring in?
Sure. I like to use sports analogies a lot. And
Good.
The answer to that question is, if you go into the locker room of a football team, there are the stars and there are the leaders, and they're not necessarily the same people.
Agreed.
There is someone, maybe there's 3 people that the other football players go to when they're looking to solve a problem, when they're looking for advice. And it may have nothing to do with football. Those are your future leaders. They don't have to have a title, but it's that way in every single organization. In my case, an HVAC company, and we've got about 50 employees, look in the mornings, look at the group of technicians and see who they're talking to.
Right.
It's not the service manager necessarily. It's not one of the field supervisors. It's somebody else, and that person, they're your next leader. and you can begin to pour resources into them if they have a desire to grow as a leader. Not everyone does, but if they have the desire, they have natural talent. They can be developed into leadership roles. Those people who are followers, just enjoy being followers and don't want the responsibility and the accountability of being a leader, there's no sense pouring those resources into them. It's going to make you miserable because you're going to fail. It's going to make them miserable because they're going to fail.
And a lot of times that leadership capacity, the influence, doesn't necessarily denote character or integrity. There are a lot of influencers out there that, was it Madonna? It was either Madonna or Britney Spears a decade plus ago, who came out after a lot of people said, well, I do this because so-and-so does that. And whichever one of those two female superstars it was said, I never asked to be your role model. Stop paying attention to me. Mm-hmm. You're like, but you spent money to promote your albums. You danced around on the stage. You said and did things that every little girl looks up to. You have at some point a responsibility to be a good human. And they're like, no, I didn't. Miley Cyrus was another one of those. And she had a real crisis conflict in her leadership, going from Hannah Montana to Miley Cyrus to who was that for a while. And now she's in a different role and has come around, so to speak. But Katy Perry was a similar influence, leadership, role model. Everybody was paying attention, but probably not the right things.
So here's the difference for us. We don't allow those people in our organization. Our organization is built around excellence and integrity, and then employee empowerment around those two things. So if we hire an employee, we talk in the interview about those things. We talk about not just providing good customer service or even great customer service. We talk about the importance of providing exceptional customer service. We talk about integrity. And then once they come into the company, they know every single day that those same values are modeled. They're not just modeled by the owner. They're modeled.
You mean they're not just posters on the wall?
They're not posters on the wall. In fact, we don't put those posters on the wall because those things have no impact. The way you live your life, the way you conduct yourself, and an owner who gets to know his employees, not just their name and not just their job title and birthday, but gets to know who they are, what makes them tick. You avoid those problems of character because you weed the bad characters, the bad actors, you weed them out pretty early. And if somebody is not wired the same way we are, if they're not interested in doing the right thing every time, they're in the wrong organization. So by the time you're looking for leaders, you already have the character piece answered for you in our organization.
So do you have a litmus test for character and core values and principles, or is that a let's get to know you 30-day, 90-day window and see if you actually have the integrity to live out what you say?
That's an observational thing. We don't have it written down, and we don't have a time frame on it. I've had people that fooled me for a while, and outside the 90-day probationary window, if we found that they were not an ethical person, and people pretty much are either ethical or they're not. Right. I've said many times, integrity is not a part-time job. You either got it or you don't. Right. And so when we see that somebody has violated that rule, then they have to be outside the organization. We can't tolerate it because our people largely work outside of our vision, so we can't always observe what they're doing. If we can't trust them, if they have the tendency to compromise integrity, we can't send them into customers' homes.
I did some leadership training for an HVAC company here in Granbury a couple of years ago, and one of the things that we discussed in the leadership meeting was, tell me how you set expectations for your service guys when they arrive at a house. And one of the females on staff said, if they stink, they need to go home. Mm-hmm. And I had spoken with somebody who had been part of the creation of Benjamin Franklin Plumbing. And one of the things the fact that the business was founded by females, Benjamin Franklin was, and they were the reason that 1 hour late we pay you up to an hour. The reason that was put in place was they were told keep a fresh uniform, keep hygiene products in the vehicle with you, And if you finish a job and it's left you nasty, go find a truck stop or something and get a shower before you go to a new client's home. Don't show up there looking like you just crawled out from under somebody's house. And that's such a profound element of customer service, but it does speak to character, it does speak to integrity, it does speak to ethics, it does speak to putting the customer's wants, needs, and desires first, not just the profit margin of, can I show up, get the work done, get the sale, close the deal, and move on to the next thing. And I think that's probably a piece of advice a lot of organizations and a lot of different industries could follow. Are you meeting the expectations of the customer that have nothing to do with your job, just with being a good person?
Yeah, I always remember that something I learned from the Trammell Crow organization was the idea that if you take care of the customer, the money will take care of itself.
Yeah.
And I've added to that, if you take care of the customer by taking care of the employees, the money will take care of itself. And because we believe that although the customer is first, if we're not providing great service to our employees, why would they provide great service to our customers?
Yeah. One of the programs that we have within Story Power Academy is called the Attitude Hack. And the Attitude Hack very much is in line with the reason that you wrote your book and the process that you went through. And I tell leaders all the time, look, if you have a front counter person who is prone to drama, and they're prone to drama in their life outside of work, but they tend to bring it to work with them. We had a young girl that was a delivery driver for us. This has been over 20 years ago, but she was a delivery driver. And I got a call one day from a customer who said, oh, my heart is just broken for this girl. And I'm like, okay. And this conversation went on for 3 or 4 minutes, and I'm the manager. I'm trying to keep things going, and finally they said, oh, the reason I called was that she brought the wrong lunch. We had catering for 20, and she brought us lunch for 4. I'm like, so I wonder who got the catering order that she was supposed to deliver. But the reason they called for that was preempted by the fact that she had shared her pity story that her boyfriend had gone off to college and she still had another year in high school in this little town, and she's like, I'm stuck here for another year without him and I'm brokenhearted. And so the drama in her life became the story she told in front of the customer, which became the brand. And so when the customer called back, it was a minuscule thing that the wrong order was delivered.
Yep.
It was a massive thing that they empathized with my employee, who probably should have had the day off if she was that much of an emotional wreck. When we forget that our employees are humans as well, then we don't work on that dialogue. So part of the process of Attitude Hack is we really kind of push them through that. What are the core values? What are the basic principles? What is the vision of the organization? From the top C-suite all the way down to the working floor, that are not just, hey, they're on a poster, make sure you read that on your way through. Was it Hilton that had the sign on the door that said, remember to smile at every customer 20 feet away because they're looking before you are. That's a great thing to know, but if the story they're telling about themselves in the company, I don't make enough money, I don't like the boss, he's too cheap, they work me too hard for not enough pay, they don't appreciate me being here, if I left the whole place would fall apart. Those kind of stories playing in the head of your employees become the dialogue they have with your customers, and no amount of advertising in the world overcomes that brand. And that's a challenge. But when executives don't have a story to tell that people can repeat, and like you said, these are the principles. Talk amongst yourself about them. Hold yourselves as a team accountable to them. If nobody intentionally does that, it doesn't happen.
Well, and not only do you have to do it intentionally, you have to do it frequently.
Yes.
It has to be a way of life.
Seven times your ad has to be seen before they even recognize your name.
you have to be celebrating things that matter to employees.
Yes.
You have to be involved in their lives. Now, I use the example in the book. If you know on a Friday that someone's daughter is participating in a music competition over the weekend, if you remember to ask Monday morning how Natalie did in her music competition, I mean, that's phenomenal, because most people wouldn't ask. And those that would ask, very few of them will remember that the girl's name was Natalie. But
Right.
if you do simple things like that, if you don't ask about the baby because you know that somebody had a baby, but if you ask about Billy, how's Billy doing? And what is he, about 6 months old now? that says things to an employee that can't be communicated by a poster, and it can't be communicated by a vision statement, you know, on the entry wall. That's how you live. That's how you empower employees on a daily basis, by getting involved with them. I like to believe that I have a different relationship with every person in my life, family, friends, employees. And if I have a conversation with you, and then I move to the next desk and have a conversation with that person, it's going to be a different conversation. I'm not going to ask, how was your weekend, as I go down the line, like most people do. We're going to talk about the things that make you different, make our relationship special. How can you not feel special when you're treated like that? That
was one of the Dale Carnegie principles that really struck me hard when he said, always speak in the terms of the other person's interest. When I train people to speak from the platform, a lot of them come with, this is my book, this is my keynote speech, this is my signature talk, this is my life story, and that's what I'm going to focus on. And I'm like, well, that's great, but what if they're not interested in your story? Well, then they shouldn't be in the audience. Maybe if you're not interested in their story, you shouldn't be on the platform, because that really is the crux of it. They didn't pay to come just to see you. They paid, they came, they gave up their time, even if they didn't write a check or swipe a credit card. They gave up their time. They made a sacrifice because they believe something you have to say is going to impact their life. But if that's not at their level of importance, then why bother? Why did they give up that time? When I find leaders who lead that way, you know, I love watching a leader who walks through a workplace, and it's not just, you know, the high fives to the top level salesperson or the other executives, but it's, you know, stopping for a moment. This is over 30 years ago now, because I've been married 31. I applied for a job in a pizza place, and the ad said management. And so I walked in. I'm E4 when I got out of the Air Force. I'm, you know, in my mid to late 20s, and I'm like, what kind of management position do you have open? So we talked. I got hired. I got the job. First day on the job, I'm walking through, and the person who was resetting the buffet, the salad buffet in this pizza place, had a string of noodles where they just weren't paying any attention to what they were doing. And on the first day, I walked behind them and picked up the string of noodles and was carrying them around in my hand. And the manager wouldn't shake my hands, and I'm like, hold on. And I had to go find a trash can and wash my hands. He's like, where did you get the noodles? I said, I picked them up off the floor. He's like, that's what I want to see in my leaders. Somebody who's willing to do what other people are not willing to do. But I was there for probably 15 days. And I never made it in 2 weeks, never made it as far as touching a cash register or cutting a pizza. I'm like, is this a training course in humility or humiliation? Because there's no management going on here. And I think it was like we discussed earlier, there are those who've reached a certain level of leadership that when they identify somebody that can outpace them, they don't have the maturity to go, hey, you can have my job, I'll move on to something else. Instead, they say, I'm going to suppress you, I'm going to divert you, I'm going to distract you, I'm going to have you so stressed out about not getting the position that you want that you just quit. Because I can't fire you, I can't justify that, but I can sure make you so miserable you leave. And unfortunately, so many organizations, that's the case. And I see it in churches, I see it in politics, I see it in business. And it seems like the larger the company is, the sooner the Peter Principle comes into play. Your level of expectation kind of reaches its top early on.
Yeah, I think what you experienced in the pizza business is that's a sick organization. It's not sick individuals. The organization has not matured to the point they don't know why they're in business. And when you don't know why you're in business, then you're always attacking symptoms. You're never attacking the root cause. Simon Sinek wrote a book called Start With Why. It didn't change our organization, but reading it helped us redefine our organization. So, as I said earlier, we're in business to provide exceptional customer service through the empowerment and support of employees. Simple. That's what we do. And when
you don't do HVAC.
We happen to do HVAC, but we're a service company. And when we go astray from that, when we're fighting these little personality battles, we're completely distracted from our mission. So our leaders are taught, when those issues come up like that, get back to the mission. Are those noodles part of providing exceptional customer service, or are they not? Do they matter? Yes, they matter. And every little thing matters. I remember that one of my partners in the real estate business had a 10-year-old son. And he noticed that his dad, when he would walk around, they'd go up to his buildings periodically. And Russ would reach down and pick up bits of paper and things and leaves on the ground. And his 10-year-old son said, "Dad, I think I understand the difference between an employee and a partner. The employees don't pick up that stuff, but every time we're out, you do." And so picking up the noodles was something that needed to be done. Counseling the employee on why we pick up, why we don't screw up like that.
Leave a Hansel and Gretel trail of noodles.
that's leadership, and it's so important in an organization to know who you are, and that way when you make decisions, do we add a person? Does it enhance customer service? Does it empower our employees? If the answer is yes on both of those, it's time to add that person. Is it time to add AI to your organization? Same two questions, and when it does, you add AI. When it doesn't, you don't add AI. For instance, we don't consider AI to be as good facing our customers as we are. So we don't use AI there. But we use AI every single day in streamlining our back office operations. As long as you know who you are and where you're going, those decisions get pretty easy.
Yeah, from a relationship standpoint, like you said, the difference between the employee and the partner. A lot of people would say, well, that's because they hold that title or they have that value or they're invested. The reality is they are a partner because they're that kind of people.
That's exactly right.
It's not that getting that title, reaching that position, having that level of investment change who that they are. It's that they achieve those things because of who they are. Myron Golden says you got to be before you can do, you got to do before you can have. Most people start with have. I want to have a new house, have a new boat, have a vacation home, have time off, whatever else. And so what do I have to do to get that? And the answer is there is no amount of doing that will allow you to have that if you don't get the be right first. You're not going to have the position or have the job or have the income or have the possessions if you're not doing the work. There are a lot of people that, for lack of a better term, inherit their opportunity. That doesn't mean they've become the kind of person that has earned that opportunity. And that's a wholly different problem.
Totally different, yep. And that goes back to when I was talking about the limitations that keep us from being better leaders or better at whatever job. When you go back and you identify those, that very often is an understanding of what it means to be a leader. It's an understanding of what it takes to go the next step. And that's the ceiling that you have to break through. And when we can break through those and say, yes, you have to be accountable before you can be a leader. You don't just pass accountability off to other people. That's not what a leader does. When you find those little idiosyncrasies in people, it's amazing how you can move them forward.
Well, and as they say, when somebody tells you who they are the first time, believe them.
Believe them, yeah.
You made a distinction. I've often made the distinction between management and leadership. I love the way John Maxwell says you've got to manage systems and lead people. Those are totally different things. You made a distinction, though, between leadership and entrepreneurship. Tell me more.
Entrepreneurs are wired uniquely. And I frankly don't think I realized that until the last 5 or 6 years. I always thought of myself as an entrepreneur, happened to be a businessman, but entrepreneurs, almost to a fault, are always thinking of every opportunity as something we can go solve or create a business to solve or whatever. We think in terms of new opportunities all the time. That can be detrimental when you're managing an organization, because you get so intrigued by the shiny new thing that you take your eye off the ball of the systems and all that make business work.
Would you say that's like a corporate ADD?
A little bit, yep. So having too many entrepreneurs can ruin your systems because they're always thinking about the wrong things. Having a nice mix of a couple entrepreneurs and some leaders and some managers, that's a great mix. Leaders, as you said, leaders lead people. entrepreneurs I won't say they lead opportunities, but they're always looking at opportunities and the next phase. That's why lots of times you find that founders who are very good at starting a business get replaced when you bring in an outside owner.
Yeah.
They get replaced because they're really not capable of leading on a daily basis because they're looking at the next opportunity.
I was listening to, I believe it was Dr. Benjamin Hardy, the author of Scale. And he said it's easier to scale than it is to grow. And the answer required a bit of an explanation, even to the multimillionaire that he was talking to. And what he said was, there are a lot of organizations that look at, here's where we are, and we want to 2x our business over last year. Well, to 2x your gross revenues, that's a pretty good hurdle. Mm-hmm. But he said, it's actually easier to 10x than to 2x. And I said, well, that's math I'd like to see. I'd like to see how it works. And so he told a story of one of the guys that he was consulting with, and I don't even know what his PhD is in, but Dr. Benjamin Hardy has apparently been very successful in helping people scale their businesses beyond even the recognition of the business owner. And he said, he asked the guy, where's your revenue now? Where do you want it to be? He said, well, last year we were at 15 million. Next year I think we can do 20. Well, $5 million is no small step. That's a lot of money. $15 million is no small step. But to go from 15 to 20, that's reasonable, right? That's a 15, 20% growth. He said, as he was talking to the guy, he said, well, what if you wanted to 50x your business? Instead of a $5 million growth, what if you wanted to go to $500,000 or to 500 million? And he was like, never even pondered that. He said, okay, let's assume you did. What would that mean from where you are now? He's like, well, we would have to stop doing this and start doing this. We'd have to invest in this. We'd have to invest in that. And he went through a whole thing, a whole scenario of what exactly it would take for his business and his industry to reach $500 million in sales. And when he was done, Dr. Hardy said, okay, so which of those things do you not want to do? And he said, the hardest thing for me is that I realize we could build all of the partnerships, we could sell all of the product, we can manufacture at the volume necessary to reach that $500,000 mark. But everybody that works for me right now would be looking for another job, because I have to stop doing X in order to do Y. Now, if I were starting tomorrow and I saw that vision, I'd just start at Y. And Benjamin said, that's exactly why it's easier to scale than to grow. But not everybody is willing at heart level to scale. Everybody wants the numbers, but they're not willing to pay the price necessary to get there. And some just barely see, here's where we are, we can go up to this. Mm-hmm. It's a hard ask. And when he was able to put his finger on it and go, this is what I would have to stop doing, and I'm not willing to stop doing that just to see that financial reward. I think there are a lot of people who, for that reason, never ask the questions necessary to scale. Yeah,
that's an interesting perspective. I'm kind of processing that as you say it, because there's a lot involved to grow 10x or 50x or even 5x that has to do with just money.
Yeah.
So I think I understand the concept, and I don't disagree with that. You would have to stop doing some things you're doing today, but it's a lot more complex than that.
Yeah, I look to the multimillionaire he was talking to, and I say, he's easily 100,000 times larger in business, has accomplished more, and we're in the same industry. So he's way ahead of me, and I have to look at that, and I have to respect that and go, he's figured out something I haven't figured out yet, but I'm working on it. But then to hear Dr. Hardy say, there is a way to do this, and if you stop thinking like this and start thinking like that, it all changes. Seems so oversimplified that it's hard to justify its reward. But then I look back on myself over the last 10 years in my business and realize there's one word that changes where I was 10 years ago from where I am today. In fact, that same word changed where I was 36 months ago to where I am today, 8 months ago from where I am today. Our last year was the first year we ever broke 6 figures as a gross revenue for our little company. And I can tell you the mind shift difference before and after. And if I'd known that difference 10 years ago, I like to think, and I could be completely wrong, I like to think all the other assets were in place to make that same growth, but I didn't know that one thing. It's that one microcosmic change. When you think about raising up people inside, if we don't train them and they stay, we have a problem. If we do train them and they go, we have a little bit of a problem. But what changes if we train them and they stay?
We grow. We grow and we succeed more, because no longer do I need to do 15 things in a day. I do the 5 things that I'm good at, and they do the other 10 amongst themselves that they're good at. I think not making that move is what hamstrings more organizations than anything else, more than money. And frankly, in my case, it took me a long time to understand that I couldn't raise up everybody. I always thought if I were a good enough communicator, if I
was a good enough leader, everybody would rise up.
If I were inspirational enough, then everybody would get this message. When I first bought the HVAC company, it was on the verge of bankruptcy. It was 2 weeks from being liquidated. And I knew that, I don't think I knew it to the degree that it was true, but I knew it was in serious trouble.
I mean, you got a great bargain on it, right?
I did, I got a great bargain, but it probably wasn't enough. But I walked in using my communication skills, my business genius that I thought I had, and sat the people down one-on-one and talked to them about the vision. And I got the oddest looks from them. And as I talked to the kind of quasi-leaders in the company, because there wasn't really any leadership in the company, I finally learned that I was a business guy. They were technical people. And they could respect me, they could appreciate my vision. They didn't believe it because I didn't have a technical background. And so I had to learn at that point that if I was going to influence technical people, I was going to do it through their leaders who were also technical. I wasn't going to do it myself.
That's a language gap, right?
It's an experience gap too. I guess even if I'd have been able to talk the technical terms, if they had known that I didn't spend time in the field, that I had just gotten out of a book, I wouldn't have had any more luck. So I think it was just a reality check. That was hard for me. I had never experienced. I'd always managed white collar people, and I always managed people who wanted my job. Now I was leading people who didn't want anything to do with my job. and so
they saw your job as redundant.
Well, no, they saw my job as something they could never aspire to, and which goes. You fast forward several years, and it has to do with what are those ceilings that people have? Does a really good technician ever think of himself as a service manager? Well, he might think about it because he knows at some point he's not going to be able to work physically like that. Well, then they'll kick me into the office. Well, you're not going to go into the office if you're not a leader. Right. And then, so you begin to teach those principles one at a time. And that goes back to the blogs in the book. The 2.5-page chapters in my book happen to match up with how blue-collar people learn. Yeah. And frankly, a lot with how I learn. So as good as John Maxwell is, they're not going to read a John Maxwell book, but they might read one chapter tonight in my book and see a principle that they can put in place tomorrow that makes them just that much better. And they can see results.
My first book, I did not commit to 2-page chapters, but I did commit to the Dale Carnegie 2-minute magic formula. And that is begin with a story, go to the call to action, tell them specifically what they can do, make it appeal to them, and have a lesson that can be life-changing. So I think the average chapter in my first book is probably 7 to 10 pages. But the concept was the same, and that was, I walked in and found my mother scrubbing the urinals in the same school where I went to middle school. I was on a break from the Air Force, had just gotten my first promotion. My sister just graduated from Baylor University. And I walked in and found my mom scrubbing in the urinal, and I said, "What are you doing?" She goes, "Well, I got to finish this one and the one on the West Wing before we can move and go to dinner." And I said, "Why are you doing that?" She goes, "Well, this is my job, son." I said, "But why are you doing that?" She said, "You know, I dropped out of college, out of high school. This is the best job I'll ever have." And it dawned on me years later that that was the story that she was repeating in her head. She had set her own limitations. She had defined her own ceiling. She was not going to do anything beyond that. Well, through a course of events that followed in the next several months, she went back to school, got her GED, went to Mary Hardin Baylor, got her degree in education with a minor in English and psychology, and retired after 27 years with the school district. And they rolled her janitor and lunchroom lady into her teacher's retirement. But she was teaching the kids that the school had given up on. The ones who said, "I'm done, I'm truant, I've got too much violence, too many suspensions." They were in the Challenger High School at this point. Mm-hmm. She saw him graduate, she saw him go on to nursing and go on to ROTC, and she was helping them to change the story in their head in the same way that she changed the story in her head. And that really was the key. But when I wrote my first book, what I realized was, the reason I think the way I do is because of all this John Maxwell stuff that I've been studying, and James Dobson and John Eldredge, those 3 books that changed my life, Wild at Heart, Bringing Up Boys, and Becoming a Person of Influence, I read in my early 20s. And there wasn't a snowball's chance that my mother was going to read any of those books. Mm-hmm. Success Principles, 398 pages, some great stuff in there.
Great stuff.
She's not going to read that. 21 Irrefutable. You couldn't beat her into reading that book. Mm-hmm. And so I realized there are a lot of people who, like my mother, have set those limitations. They've set the ceiling for themselves, and they're not going anywhere from right here. Their belief system is so corrupt that there's no hope for them. And unfortunately, from a faith standpoint, it's equally true. There are people who don't believe about themselves that God has something for them to do, that there's a place for them to go, there's a service for them, that they're beloved, that they're treasured and highly valued. And when you put those two things together and you have an employee who is self-loathing, self-destructive, their weekend habits destroy their credibility every single weekend, and they come back on Monday and try to rebuild their reputation again, that's not just the work ethic. That's not just the job title. That's not just this is what my job is. This is the who that I am. And if we as leaders can't influence that, then we lose.
Yeah, I agree. I have 2 stories that I repeat a lot. I'll tell one just briefly. A lady came to us in a dispatcher role, and I'm real good about stopping by and talking to all of the employees that are in the office every day, and I couldn't break through with her. And I've learned over the years that you don't push it any harder than it needs to be pushed. But I was going to be me, and so I was going to treat her just like I was treating anybody else. But she would interact with me as she had to, but you could tell she was pretty glad when I moved on to interact with somebody else. And she was okay at her job. She wasn't anything fantastic, but she was fine. One Monday morning, she came in and I stopped by and was talking to her, and she was open, and she told me a story about her son playing football, and the referee had called a penalty on her son that she thought was outrageous. And she kind of made a fool of herself, as parents often do. And that was something that resonated with me because I'd been in the very same spot more than once, and I had done that too. And we broke through that day. And I can point to it in our relationship. I can't swear that that's the thing that opened her up. But she was so closed off before that. And not only was she more open with me, she was more open with everybody else. And all of a sudden, she became kind of a special employee. She's now a supervisor in the company and doing a bang-up job. And I think that goes to what you're saying. She viewed the relationship between herself and other people as not part of the equation. And even though she experienced every day that we were an employee-centric company, we like to have those relationships, she was not going to break through. She had the capacity because she showed us the capacity afterwards. So it was a willful decision on her part. I am not going to let them in.
Yeah.
But when she let us in and we let her in as a result, it unlocked her potential. And I have no idea what the limit is of her potential, but it took a year before she would buy in.
Well, and sometimes that's the leadership capacity to be stalwart, to stick with it when it seems to be making no progress,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's that every relationship even has the same hockey stick as business success. It's a long, flat, small uphill grade until all of a sudden it becomes exponential. The number of times that I've encountered people who are closed down due to their own wounds, past trauma, bad relationships.
Absolutely.
I had a lady who went through our course, I guess it was winter of 2022. She went through our Story Power Masterclass course. And about halfway through the day, right around lunchtime, I just look over and she's arms crossed. She's been taking notes all morning. She's been deeply engaged in the conversation. She's been paying close attention. And now she's got her books closed and all stacked up. She's got her pens laying on top and she's got her arms crossed. And she's not engaged anymore at all. And I finally just stopped what I was saying and I said, "You okay?" And she said, "No, I'm kind of triggered. I'm really mad at you right now. And I'm really thinking about just storming out the door. I'm just waiting for the right moment." I said, "Okay."
At least she was honest.
Straight up honest. And I said, "Triggered by what?" She said, "The way you tell stories is what my husband used to manipulate the judge when he took my kids from me." And I said, "Stories can be very manipulative because they tug at your heartstrings and they change the way you think." And she said, "I just feel like you're wounding me all over again and I don't want to be here." And by the time she had tears streaming down her face. And so I called my wife. She was running production like she is today. And I called her out of the little production booth and I said, "Quick question for you." She said, "Yeah." I said, "Do you believe that I love Nadia?" And she said, "Yeah." And so I turned to Nadia, who's looking at my wife going, "You don't even know me, right?" And I said, "Do you believe that I love Nadia?" And she sat there for a minute like, what does that have to do with any of this? And then she looked back at my wife, and then she looked back at me, and she goes, "Yes." And I said, "I realize I pushed you off a cliff. I get it. You're scared. You're hurt. You're wounded. I get it. I need you to know something, though. I'm jumping right behind you, and I have a parachute. And if you'll let me catch you, I'll let you down easy." About 2 months ago, just before we went to church Sunday morning, I get a text message. It says, "I'm going to be in town. I'd love to go to church with you." And Nadia drove from McKinney to Granbury
Wow.
to go to church with us. So afterward, we had lunch, and I'm like, I still tell that story. She goes, "Oh, I do too. I tell it all the time about how I learned the power of stories through someone who wounded me and then taught me the truth." And I was like, yes, big win. That's one of the best testimonials you could ever imagine as a leader teaching influence, to see the influence when someone's countenance changes. But in the same room, we're patched up, we're good. She's got her notebook out, we're, done our little handshake, and we're ready to move on. And out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a lady sitting there with her arms crossed, and I'm like, what now? Who did I trigger now? And I believe her last name was McMillan. She said, I've been in ministry 35 years. I'm working on my next PhD right now, and I'm already in LPC, but she said, in all the training that I've done, I've never been in a class where somebody called out the professor and he stopped what he was doing to listen. She said, that speaks volumes about character. She said, but the fact that you handled it the way you did, I'm a raving fan. I was like, great, let's carry on with the class, because I'm not just demonstrating to you the way I believe we should live, I'm teaching you to do that. Mm-hmm. To care about what other people think, feel, and say, so that you can speak to them in a way that resonates with who they are and how they think, feel, and say. And we're going at the end of this month to work with a bunch of Christian authors and train them in this media experience. How do you demonstrate the quality of your book in an interview And especially when you only get 7 to 10 minutes, because that's the norm. You know, even on a podcast, we've got a little more time. We control the time, but if you're on a network that doesn't give you flexibility of time, you are lucky to get a 15-minute interview slot, which means you're going to talk 4 to 6 minutes because the rest of that's taken up by ads and your host. If you get a Joe Rogan style 2.5-hour interview, you're blessed. But most people can't answer a question that briefly, or talk about what's important, or the core values, or what they want to articulate. So that's part of what we train people to do.
Well, you didn't use the word, but transparency is another one of those leadership characteristics that's real powerful. And a lot of leaders are real good at explaining the mission and explaining ethics and things like that, but then they don't model that. And if you don't model your leadership character, if you don't model character, if you don't model transparency, if you don't model integrity all the time in every interaction, then people are going to go backwards, because you can lose trust a lot faster than you can build trust. And so I think transparency goes a long way, particularly in a small business where, you know, you're the owner. You're not a big deal, but you are the owner. And it took me a long time to understand that people saw me differently when I was the owner. I'm just rich as far as I'm concerned. But if you're not aware of that, and not aware how important it is that you're not allowed the transgressions that other people are, because you have 3 or 20 or 50 people watching you, and they're not watching you on your daily work, they're watching you on every single interaction. And when you step backwards on an interaction, when you lose your temper, when you decide to go off on an employee and you don't treat them with respect, it has huge ramifications.
Well, then it becomes a rumor mill. And now the story they're telling about you know, I spent 10 years at Verizon in the marketing department, marketing communications, sales, brand management. And people often ask me to speak on marketing and brand and sales. And so I'll tell them, understand that your brand is not your color, it's not your logo, it's not your color scheme, it's not your tagline. It's all of those together, but it's more than that. I'll simplify brand like this. Brand is the story everyone else tells about you when you're not in the room. He's cheap, he's rude, I saw him go off on so-and-so. And they very seldom, like anybody else, especially on Reddit or X or wherever else, they very seldom tell the positive story.
Correct.
But they'll very quickly tell the negative story. And when the negative story becomes the thing that's repeated, it's not just your external brand, it's your internal culture. And so in the attitude hack and in story power, that's one of the things we teach business leaders. If you're not intentionally seeding the conversation in your workplace with the kind of statements that you hope those people tell about you when they're outside the building, then they are unintentionally creating their own. And they may not be favorable. But the story that they tell is based on what you demonstrate in front of them. And I agree 1,000%. The transparency, I also hold the value myself, and it's what happens a lot of time in these interviews. I'm very transparent about who I am and what I've been through and how I've gotten to where I am. And in some of those cases, you know, I'll say things to people and they're like, I can't believe you just said that, like in front of the camera. And I'm like, I've said it 1,000 times in front of the camera and live and in front of a crowd and in one-on-one coaching sessions. And you can look it up in the book. And if you're curious if I'm telling the truth, go ask my wife. I don't have any secrets from her. They're like no secrets? I'm like, she owns the password to every device I have. She knows where I keep my journals. I have no secrets from her at all. I mean, if it happens and I think that's going to have an impact on her, I tell her, even if she's like, I don't know why you told me that. Because it may come back to bite me someday, and I want you to know about it ahead of time. That same level of transparency has been in my leadership roles as well. You know, there are some things that just don't need to be discussed among, you know, employees. A, it's none of their business, or B, it's detrimental to the relationship. I don't mean to hide those things, but I do mean to exercise discretion. So when you talk about someone like your dispatcher, I think there are a lot of leaders who feel like they can operate in a business with that kind of closed off, stay in my silo, stay in my space. Squeaky wheel gets the grease or gets replaced. So I don't want to be greased or replaced, so I'm just going to stay over and be quiet and do nothing. And in our attitude hack, there's actually a word for that. It's called the attitude of complacency or resignation. And when you start putting those things together, you realize if you hear these 4 or 5 phrases out of somebody, that ought to tell you something. And if you're not paying attention to it, you're in trouble. But like you said, as a leader, if we're not modeling how we expect them to behave, why would we expect them to behave that way?
Yeah, I agree. And, there are so many business owners or leaders who are closed off and who do operate that way. You can operate successfully that way. I would not be able to operate happily that way.
Right.
And you were talking earlier about scaling and growing. We're not as big as I thought we would be at this stage of our development, but I couldn't be prouder of the organization that we are. And I'm not sure if we were 3 times our size that I could have done that and maintained the integrity in the operation. So I kind of have made decisions along the way. Maybe that sounds like an excuse, but I've made decisions that I live in this town.
Yeah.
I'm going to sleep well at night. I'm going to be proud when someone on the golf course says, hey, we used you guys for the first time. I know that the answer is going to be, and we had a great experience. That's very important to me, and I don't know how you could be closed off, not be part of people's lives, and feel that you are as successful as you probably should.
Well, and some people, it's all about the numbers. I mean, I know people who have, a couple of them that I've watched from a distance. They wouldn't know me from Adam, but I pay very close attention to them, who have done business mergers, acquisitions, some of them both, some all of the above, and they've gone from the 6 figures to the 10 figures, and a little jealous of their numbers, but then within a couple of years, they're a flash in the pan and they're gone. And they've left in their wake bitter customers, bitter employees, lives impacted for the negative, money that came and went. And I think, in fact, 4:10 in the morning, it's written down, I don't remember the exact day, I was awakened from a dream with a question. And I felt like the Spirit said, for $100 million, would you walk away from Leading Leaders Podcast, Story Power Academy, and never do this work ever again? It's a tough question. For a lot of people, the answer is for $100 million, I could live pretty good on $100 million until I pass. But the real question is, will I have lived out my calling? Will I have done what I was put on this earth to do? Because if I effectively do that and I die broke, I'm okay with that. If I make all the millions and can put my kids in the best school or my grandkids in the best school and drive the newest car, and I've sold my soul to pull that off, I'm not okay with that. It's not just sleeping at night. I guess after your heart is calloused enough, you can sleep however, whenever, wherever. But it's being able to stand there on that judgment day and go, were you a good and faithful servant, or did you bury your talent, or did you exploit your talent? And I think there are a lot of people who have not yet asked that question.
It's a great conversation, because at this age, I have recently retired, and
Congratulations.
I always thought that in retirement that I would volunteer my time at a faith-based agency in the back office, put my business skills to use, and but that never has materialized. I've thought that for 10 years, and God never moved me in that direction, and I have always wondered why. Well, now that I am promoting the book and on a lot of podcasts and speaking engagements, I have an opportunity to mix in my faith, even though the subject is not faith, but I get to have conversations just like we're having now that lead into faith. And I was talking with my pastor the other day, and I was telling him that I was a little bit confused that God evidently didn't want me at a faith-based agency. And he said, Rich, do you realize how much bigger your platform is now than it has ever been? He said, you're exactly where God wants you to be. And I wish I'd have figured that one out on my own, but it speaks to what you're talking about. And
Well, and we forget when we lead a company, I mean, trying to remember what the name of the company was, the guy who was recently caught on the kiss cam at a major baseball game.
Yeah.
And you think to yourself, I mean, does he influence thousands? Yes. Does he move millions of dollars? Yes. Did his character keep up with his authority? No. Mm-hmm. And now the whole world knows it. And now you've got to step back and go, of all the things that you trusted him for, that you invested in him for, that you walked the same path with him for, how did you not see that in his character? Or how did you not care? And I had this conversation with a minister who's been in ministry close to 40 years now. You never know it because, you know, good genes. But they said, you know, think of Lazarus. Think of Jesus. Think of Peter and Judas. And when Jesus said, one of y'all is going to betray me, they all looked around like, is it me? And one of them actually said, is it me? Mm-hmm. And so do we have the ability to hide our deceit from even ourselves? Yes. Do we have the ability to live in the spotlight and not let the world see that we're flawed? Apparently so. Does that make us any less accountable? Absolutely not. Mm-hmm. And I think there are a lot of people who feel like, because I've gotten away with it all this time, it must be okay. And they're under this delusion that if what I was doing is wrong, I would have been busted by now. I mean, was actually listening to a politician in an interview, just a man on the street stuck a mic in his face. And the politician's answer was, if what I did was wrong, how come I haven't been arrested? And I'm thinking, I don't know, investigations take time.
What a great
They're
defense.
still waiting for you to confess it. You know, there's a whole lot of reasons. Maybe it's coming. And then he said, I won't even repeat the phrase, it was so bad. But his quote, I believe, ended his political career. And the sad part is, all of his other attributes, all of his other accomplishments, all of his other vision, you look at and go, great guy. That's exactly who we want to lead us. But he's looking to be the governor of a state that has a pretty good governor with a great track record right now, that has the personal fortitude and the character and the exemplary behavior. He's not kissing strange people on a kiss cam. He's not, you know, showing up in the halls of Congress with people he's not even supposed to be hanging out with. And it's amazing that we elevate someone to that level of leadership, and we simultaneously underplay what we've accomplished with the 10 or the 12 people whose lives we've impacted deeply. Mm-hmm. And now that we have YouTube and we have Facebook and we have all these other platforms, I mean, I started doing media stuff when I was 15 or 16 years old. I interviewed people in the local town for my local radio station when I was still in high school. I had my first big interview when I worked for a 100,000 watt station in East Texas with Luis Palau. That was my first big interview. But there's not a television station today, unless they're on iHeart and, you know, some of the bigger platforms, who has the kind of reach that YouTube has. Mm-hmm. And we try to count views, and then we realize, you know, if I had that one conversation over a cup of coffee and brought about that kind of transformation, the answer to that question is good and faithful servant. Mm-hmm. And we forget that it's beyond the 50 or 60 that sign up and I sign their paychecks. It's every customer that's ever been touched by those employees who exemplify the leadership that you instilled in them, who live the kind of life that they wouldn't be the people they are if they hadn't worked in your environment first.
Yeah, I hope that's true. I hope that's true.
Well, every leader that you've chosen to raise up, right? You invested in them because you believe something about them that probably they didn't believe about themselves.
Often, yeah.
So the big question for this show is always the same. Who is Jesus to you, and why should I care?
Well, the day after Easter, that's a really good time to ask that question. So it's pretty easy for me. Forgiveness, which leads to freedom, which leads to peace. That's what it's meant to me. And I reconnected with my faith at age 50. I was raised in a Christian home, but not a unconditional loving home. And so through my wife and through friends and all, I realized in my mid-40s that something major was missing. And it took me until age 50 when I reconnected. But it was, and I was raised with a lot of shame, which I don't think was uncommon in that generation. And I'd heard the message that I was good enough because I was good enough for my Savior. But it never resonated with me until the last 2 years. And the same pastor that I mentioned earlier. And he was just preaching a normal sermon about being good enough. You know, if you're forgiven by God, that's as good as it gets.
Yeah.
And that's when I realized that I was okay, and dealing with shame was a waste of my time. I wasn't going to be ashamed anymore. That led me to a position of peace. And as a relatively hard-charging business guy, I never, ever even thought of myself as reaching a position of peace. And it's only because, yes, I've had some financial success, yes, I have a good family, but it's my faith that allowed me to get to peace. So yeah. Jesus ultimately to me means peace.
You know, it's amazing how many people, and having walked through the stories of trauma and tragedy and a lack of love, we see that in other people. There's a resonance there. And people often ask me, as a leader, why in the world would I tell a story about my childhood? I was working with a person just the other day who's building money for a mission trip. And they told a story, and they're like, that story is incredible to me. It means a lot to me. You know, I'm just not sure that it does anything for my audience. It's cathartic. And I said, that's because you have a major delusion about the story. And I said, what do you mean? I said, that story's not about you. Like, no, it's my story. It happened to me. It is about me. I said, no, it's not. It's an overlay. Because everyone that you're asking to donate for this mission trip has lived the same story. And more than that, everyone that you're going to minister to has lived the same story. The difference is those two groups of people have not yet moved from the discovery to the revelation. You're a step ahead of them. You realize that you've been lied to and you've been lying to yourself. And now this is a truth that has always been. And now you have the opportunity to accept it as truth. They don't have that yet. So whether they're giving to you because you helped them discover that, or they're giving to you because you're going into the mission field to help others discover that, either way, that story's not about you. God allowed you to experience that so you could tell that story exactly. for them.
Yep.
And I think when we try to put ourselves in the category of ministry and say, I'm doing this for the kingdom, we forget that God used even Einstein, who it wasn't until his deathbed went, I think I missed something. I mean, never too late if you're still speaking, right? That's a pretty good sign. But all along, it seemed like his effort was to disprove God until finally God broke through. But where would we be in the world without all of the work that he did, all of the endeavor, all of the enthusiasm to disprove God that became a stronger proof of his existence? We would be nowhere near where we are as a human race if not for people like that. And if somebody said, so how long was Einstein in the ministry? I don't know, 8 minutes? I mean, from the time he said, I think I missed, until he took his last. But his entire life, everything he did, I think it was Dr. Caroline Leaf, she said, generally speaking, science proves God. Good science always proves God, verifies what he said is true. And I think that's a powerful thing for a lot of us to realize. We may not be ordained and licensed to stand in the front of the church or perform weddings and funerals, but if we're living out the gospel,
yeah, it's the most powerful testimony.
That's as ministry as it gets. Yeah, I was blind, now I see.
Yep.
That's the reason we ask this question. So here's the next question, the follow-on to that same question is, why should what you believe about Jesus matter to me?
Oh, it's simply because I think it applies to you just like it applies to everybody else. And I don't know that I have any particular influence over you, but I think God uses me every day to spread that mission, just like you said. That's my ministry, however small it might be. I hope it would influence you, just like I hope it would influence anybody else.
Very good. Any questions I failed to ask?
I don't think so. I think this was a great conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you being here.
Appreciate being invited.
Rich Ashton, my friends, grow your own. Grow your own faith, grow your own business, grow your own employees. And if you're curious about the leaders that are in your environment, are they ready to be raised up, or is it time to replace them with someone who's already in that leadership capacity? Take the time, grab the book. I'll put the links below, but I'm sure you can find it on Amazon or anywhere else. And like I said, we'll make the links available so you can grab the book and learn from a man who built himself up in the kingdom and in the world, from starting off in real estate to owning and running multiple companies and hiring, training, and employing dozens to be leaders, influencers in this world. And if you're asking the question, who is Jesus to me? Ask him yourself. I mean, he asked Peter that question, who am I to you? Peter had a pretty profound answer. You could have the same answer, but I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to tell you to ask him. And if you think maybe he's not listening to me, he doesn't care about me, start with this question. Jesus, do you love me? You might be amazed that you get an answer. You might be amazed at the answer that you get, but I promise you this, you will get an answer, and that's not my promise, that's his. If you seek me, I will be found by you. That's his promise. Call God on it. And if you got to yell at him and scream at him and cuss at him for something in your life that didn't go right, do it. He's a big boy, and he wants to hear it. Best customer complaint department in the world is in heaven. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I appreciate you being part of Story Powered TV. I hope that you'll share this with everybody who is asking questions about their own leadership skills, and if they need to grow them. That's what we're here for. We're glad to do that. Reach out to Rich Ashton. Reach out to Story Power Academy, and let us speak into your life. I'm Loren Norris with Story Power TV for Tell